2025, brand new me. 2025, completely different life. This is the year I sort my shit out. Babes, it isn't gonna be any fucking different if you don't change. The concept of freedom outside of you isn't actually freedom, because it means it's still a conditional way of being. If you need something on the outside of you to be different, for you to feel different, it means you're not free at all. To create outside freedom, but we currently don't have inside freedom because we're allowing the past versions of us to dictate what we do next. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Lucy Superfox show. My name is Lucy Superfox and this is my podcast. So on this week's episode, I want to talk to you about the word freedom and what freedom really means to me and what it really means to some of the clients I've worked with this year and how it has been completely transformative in all areas of their life. So if your word for 2025 or the energy that you want to move into in 2025 is freedom, then this is the podcast for you. So a little note before we begin, I would absolutely love to have your reviews, to have your comments, to have your subscribe if you are watching on YouTube, because the truth is I love sharing my message with the world. This is absolutely what I'm here to share. In spiritual terms, this is my medicine. This is what I am here to do. And so if there is something that resonates, that lands, that you feel would serve and help and guide others, then please leave a comment. Drop it a share, give me a tag, and I will make sure to reshare the same. I wanted to talk about in this week's episode the power of what a freedom mentality really means. And I think that there's a lot of misconceptions about what this word means and how it works and how it shows up for us in life. And, we ultimately spend a long time chasing it and never achieving it. So without further ado, let's dive in. So let's talk about the word freedom. Let's define it. What does freedom mean to you? Because it looks different to every single person. And I think one of the most important things is to get really clear on what it means to you. So for somebody, freedom might mean total financial freedom, that there's 10 million in the bank. And for some people, 10 million in the bank wouldn't be freedom, right? Or it might mean that you work when you want. So you're self-employed versus being employed. Or freedom might mean that you can make choices and decisions without somebody else having an opinion. So I think it's really important, first up, for you to define and get really clear on what freedom means to you. So freedom to me has meant the freedom to choose. And I always come back to it. It's my number one come back to whenever I'm making any decisions in my business, about my life, about what I want to do, is does this align with my top value, which is the freedom to choose? Because like I said, freedom is a sense of being. Freedom is not a place, it's not somewhere we arrive. Freedom is an energy. Freedom is a way of being. It's a way of breathing. It's a way of living. And so I really made the intentional decision when I got clear on what it was I valued, which I do with a lot of my clients and a lot of my programs, was that my number one is the freedom to choose. So it's not about freedom per se as it is about the freedom to know I have the power and the autonomy and the kind of the sense of self to be able to choose. Now, the reason I'm sharing that is I think a lot of the time we're craving this freedom to choose from outside of ourselves. So maybe we've got a really controlling partner and we feel like we don't get to do anything for ourselves. Maybe we have a boss that micromanages, so we feel like we can't engage in our own work. Maybe we don't have the finances that we want, so we feel like we're not free to go on that vacation or take those days off or make that trip. And as much as they are absolutely fall under this freedom era umbrella of things that we can create and redefine in our life, the truth of it is, feeling of freedom that you are actually seeking has nothing to do with anyone else and has nothing to do with your circumstances. The feeling of freedom that you are seeking comes when you are in the driving seat of your own life. When you are the person that, rather than allowing your life to be running on autopilot, that you are intentionally making choices and decisions and commitments and taking action from a place that feels aligned and intentional. And to me, that is what the freedom to choose means. It means that I am not allowing the past to dictate the future. It means I am not allowing my subconscious programs and habits that maybe have been sabotaging to step forward and to take over. And it means I'm not allowing outside environments, other people's opinions, other people's expectations to dictate what I do. And what happens so much of the time is that we're chasing these outward freedoms, this concept of financial freedom, or we're chasing freedom from a boss or freedom from, a relationship or freedom financially, but we're not actually creating that sense of freedom inside ourselves because we're actually allowing past versions of us, unhealed versions of us that had to survive and deal with different things. We're allowing them to dictate and run the show now. I just want you to kind of just sit with that for a minute. We're looking to create outside freedom, but we currently don't have inside freedom because we're allowing the past versions of us to dictate what we do next, what we create next, and how we move forward next. Does that land? Like, do you feel that? Because when you really reflect on that, it's actually quite scary. When you realize that the freedom that you are seeking, the first step to it anyway, is actually about you. It's actually about what you do and what you don't do, and how you think and what you don't think, and how you feel and what you don't feel. That's what freedom is. The freedom to choose, the feeling of freedom, is one where you are in the driving seat of your own life. It's one where the past doesn't get to dictate the future. It's the one where you get to take intentional, aligned action in the direction of your goals and dreams. And it's one where the previous versions of you, the neggy voices in your head, the terrified emotions inside of you that don't get to control the show. That is freedom. So when we're chasing all these outside elements of freedom, we have to create it within us first. We live in a world based on cause and effect, where we think we take a certain action, we get a certain result. But the truth is, we're in an energetic universe. We are in a vibrational universe, one that is responding. And one of the analogies I gave my client the other day is think of life like a boomerang. So whenever you put out an intention, an energy, a word, a thought, take an action, think, would I want this to boomerang back to me? And if the answer is yes, winner. If the answer is no, it's time for some assessment. The concept of freedom outside of you isn't actually freedom, because it means it's still a conditional way of being. If you need something on the outside of you to be different, for you to feel different, it means you're not free at all. It means you're living a totally conditional life based on outside environment, outside circumstances, and outside, things happening. So a freedom world that you are seeking has to begin from within, because number one, we live in a vibrational universe. So if we're not feeling freedom, we're not going to get freedom reflected back to us. If we're feeling free, we're going to get freedom reflected back to us. Once we then get it reflected back to us and we then feel free, right, to boomerang back and forth, that is when we can make choices and decisions to intentionally create more freedom opportunities outside of us. So whether that will be wealth, whether that be becoming our own boss, whether that be becoming changing the boundaries in our business to create more freedom. But the freedom doesn't come from the action, the freedom comes from the emotion. And so when we're chasing any kind of freedom, like I said, financial, emotional, relational, it doesn't actually matter. It first has to start with the sense that we are free, and most of us are bound by the chains of our past. We're bound by the chains of our limiting beliefs. We're bound by the chains of our nervous system that freaks out every time we go live on Instagram, or freaks out every time we put ourselves out there, or freaks out every time the bank balance drops below 20 quid or whatever it is. And that's because that's the past version of us still holding us back, pulling us back into a safer version of us. And that's never a bad thing. I rant about this all the time, but there is a difference between a comfort zone and a safety zone, and we should never leave our safety zone. Because if your body is telling you that something is unsafe, it feels genuinely dangerous, you might cognitively know that it's not a saber-toothed tiger, whatever. The truth is, if you try to move beyond that and it doesn't quite work out the way that you want, what then happens is you'll often go into shutdown mode. And shutdown mode is not a place where anything good happens. So instead, the answer is not to push beyond our safety limitations. It's to allow ourselves to create that sense of safety so that we can make these baby steps and move forward. This is what healing is, my friends. So many of us want to reject it. So many of us want to push it away. I did for years. And in fact, I said this the other day to someone. I was like, a big part of my journey to freedom was healing my trauma. And they were like, oh my gosh, what happened to you? I was like, I don't know. Turns out I had loads of trauma I didn't even know about. Right now, I've got some stories, for sure I have. But the truth is, those stories are not the trauma. The trauma is how safe I felt when things happened and life happened. And because I didn't feel safe when those life experiences happened, they became trauma imprints that kept showing up. And this is why if you try to move beyond the trauma imprints of your past, you're actually re-traumatizing yourself. You're not changing, you're not developing, you're not growing, you're not stretching, you're actually re-traumatizing yourself. So this is why the answer to creating change on the outside of your life must begin with inner work, or all we do is create more conditions. So if this has to be going well and this has to be happening for me to feel safe, we're the opposite of free. We are upside down, as far away from free as we can get. Freedom is a state of being when we are the ones in the driving seat, when we are intentionally changing how we think, intentionally changing how we feel, and intentionally bringing safety to our nervous system so that we can, right? So that I can put myself out there, so that I can earn more money, so that I can have a body transformation, so that I can meet the love of my life. Those things are a so that I can when we create a sense of freedom inside of ourselves. So how do you know what that feels like? You're like, what does that feel like? Can you fill me in? And the truth is, freedom feels like the freedom to choose. that you are not overrun by emotions. You're not overrun by anxiety. You're not overrun by fear or rumination or worrying. One where you're not overrun by, and again, not saying you don't ever worry, but you're not overrun by these habits that happen and play out before you even notice them. And in fact, a really great example of this is this weekend. So I'm actually filming this about a week before it goes live. It's actually before Christmas at the time of filming. And I have family coming for Christmas, and I love my family, and I actually think I have a very good relationship with most of my family members. Of course, there's been trauma I've had to work on, and guilt and shame and fear and all these emotions over my healing journey. But I was feeling mega fucking triggered. And I just mean but for no reason. There was nothing specific, but I was anxious, I was stressed, I was getting frustrated. And my number one sign when I'm out of alignment is frustration. So I'm a generator in human design. And my kind of my top end of when I know I'm nailing it is when I feel satisfied. Not buzzing, because again, that's me in hyperactivity, usually with ADHD. I'm actually in a place of yes, that's good. I'm happy with that. I'm happy how that looks. I'm happy. And the opposite of that, of satisfaction, is frustration. So when I find myself in frustration, I know that something has been triggered, like a wound has been triggered, or something's talking, or something's coming up for me to heal. And I was like, what the fuck, man? And that's literally what I said to my husband. I was like, what the fuck? I was like, everything's great. I have a great life. Life is good. We're good. Money's good. Business is good. Everything's good. I was like, what the fuck? And then I realized it was nothing to do with anything I was working on. It was nothing to do with what I was frustrated about, although sometimes technology does grind my gears. It was nothing to do with that. And actually, it was the fact that I am a recovering peacekeeper. I am a recovering people pleaser. And I just like everyone to have a lovely time. I genuinely, and it comes from being young and probably, managing an argument between my mum and my sister, or my dad and my mum, or making sure that my brother was okay, or, it comes from an energy of love, but my experience as a younger person. And so I've been a peacekeeper and a people pleaser my whole life. Not in the way that you would probably assume people pleasers are, but I'm a peacekeeper. That's the word I prefer. And so even though I don't embody that energy very much anymore, I am very I'm actually more of a disruptor than a peacekeeper, I think. I noticed how actually an older version of me that wants to be a peacekeeper was coming up, because obviously I knew family were coming into town. I wanted to get all the shopping done. I'm hosting, I'm cooking. I was like, that's not going to be enough food. And I was I was worrying and ruminating, and I was what's the word I'm looking for? It felt like an overreach. I was overreaching and trying to overdo. And I was like, oh. And as soon as I recognized it, I was like, holy shit. I'm not upset or worried or concerned that I'm spending time with my family. I love that for me. I was like, it's just opening up a previous version of me that hasn't fully healed. And so in that moment, I realized I wasn't in my freedom. I wasn't in a freedom energy, and I wasn't free to choose how I was feeling. And so I tell you that story because there is a narrative that says we are always free to choose. And yes, technically we are. But if we have a subconscious mind, which includes your nervous system, which is your reaction system, right? Hot stove, ow, going live on Instagram, oh, right? Your reaction system, and your subconscious mind is part of that. And that's 90 to 95% of your programming. And then you've got 5%, which is for new thinking stuff. You've got 5% versus 95%. So yes, you are free to choose technically, but on the whole, most people are living life on the 95%, on the programming. And if you're not doing inner work to change that programming, to shift energies of the past, to heal your trauma, and I'm going to say how it comes out, if you're not doing that, what the fuck are you doing? Why the fuck are you here? Because if you actually want to create a life of freedom, you've got to free yourself from the chains of your past. So if you are still not actually addressing the fact there's trauma to heal, you're actually not changing how you think, you're actually not changing how you feel, you're just listening to a podcast saying, oh, that makes sense, or you're watching a video and going, oh, that's nice, or you're reading some books and going, oh yeah, that's interesting, but you're not actually embodying any of that work, or not actually being willing to do any of that and step into that. And again, as a part of your programming that won't be letting you do that. But I want you to know then there's no real freedom, right? The more you know, the worse it gets. Ignorance is bliss, because if you know all this stuff about trauma, and you know all this stuff about mental reprogramming, you know all this stuff about mindset, but you're not actually embodying any of it, nothing will change. And then you are still a prisoner of your past. So if you are actually seeking a place where you feel free to choose, so free not to emotionally eat, free not to overspend, and free to design your life, all of it's the same, by the way. The reason you emotionally eat is because your subconscious patterns and neuroprogramming and your trauma is looking for something. The reason you overspend and get that urge to shop is exactly the same. The reason that you over apologize and ruminate when you think someone's mad with you is exactly the same. It's all the same trauma showing up in different ways because you have unmet needs that need to be met through healing. So if you're not doing that, but you are trying to create a life of financial freedom, a life where you love your body, a life where you're happily in love and with the right person, it's going to be more difficult because the previous versions of you, and especially the older you get, truth is, the previous versions of you are the ones living out your life right now. So if you need to step into this energy of like shifting it, changing it and rearranging it, that's how we create freedom. We don't create freedom outside of us. We create emotional freedom inside of us to be able to make new choices, to make new decisions, to reprogram, and then create the stuff outside of us by doing our inner stuff, by doing, and I say the word inner work and people think that's like, oh God, it's so hard. But it's work because it takes effort. Not hard work, it's not hard, it's rewarding. Because here's the truth, my favorite ever phrase, if nothing changes, nothing changes. If nothing changes, nothing changes. But what happens so much of the time this time of year is we get to the end of the year and we think 2025 will be different. 2025, brand new me. 2025, completely different life. This is the year I sort my shit out. Babes, it isn't gonna be any fucking different if you don't change. And your change doesn't come from your willpower. It doesn't come from holding on and white knuckling it. It comes from you being willing to look at the thoughts, the beliefs, the energy, and the trauma that is keeping you in a previous version of yourself. And I have to do this work, guys. Like I said, I was triggered this weekend into this ridiculous energy that just felt awful, felt god awful. And I had to sit with it and look at it and assess it. And I'm very fortunate to have an amazing husband who I can work through this stuff with. But I want you to know that if you are genuinely seeking a life of freedom, a feeling of freedom, it's the year you're financially free, it's the year you're emotionally free, it's the year that you're free from the sabotaging habits and patterns that comes from the inner stuff, and life will boomerang back to you the outer stuff, the results, the energy, the people, the places, the things. But we have to embody the energy, and we do that through being able to heal the old versions of us that are still being triggered, that are still stepping forward, that are still running the show day in and day out. And so you can chase freedom forevermore. But until you embody that freedom energy through healing, through growth, through breaking cycles, nothing really changes. So, some good news for you. On the 1st of January at 8 p.m. UK time, that is, I am hosting the Freedom Masterclass. This is a free training. It's going to be 45 minutes long. It's the 5 steps to breaking any cycle that you are stuck in. I ran this back in August, so if you've watched that, this is going to be a new and improved version. This one includes the ADHD cycle, so I'm talking more about ADHD. I'm talking about cravings and urges and how to overcome them. And I'm going to be diving deep into the money cycle, the body cycle, the food cycle, and the work cycle, because there is no difference between your workaholism and your emotional eating. There is no difference between your overspending and your binge watching TV. They are all the same things showing up in different ways. So if you want to join me live, and the reason you want to join me live is all about the energy, because I want you to feel the infusion of my energy like you do on this podcast, but imagine you're with me in the room. Imagine how deep you would feel that inside your body. You want to join me live, then you can get that by going to lucysuperfox.com/freedom. Now, if you do miss it, if you're busy, if you've got plans, I totally get it. You can grab the replay at the same link, lucysuperfox.com/freedom. And you're also going to unlock 2 meditations. So one is for walking, so when you're out getting your walk in or your steps in, to listen to. So it's an active rewiring. And the second is a relaxation meditation for rewiring. And they're both called the Future You meditation. So if you want to grab those and grab your seat and grab your place to either join me live or get the replay of the Freedom Masterclass, so that 2025 is actually your freedom era, is actually the year that it changes, is actually the year that you step into the energy of the life of your dreams, the life of freedom, then you can get that by going to lucysuperfox.com/freedom. I hope you had a wonderful festive season. I wish you a very happy new year, and I cannot wait to see what's next for you in 2025. And I'll see you on the next episode.